Welcome back to ABA Chapter Chat. Today, we're diving into something really fundamental to what we do as ABA professionals, and that's education.
And I think getting ready for a twist because we're going to look at it through the lens of applied behavior analysis.
That's right. And to help us with this deep dive, we're going to be taking a look at a chapter called Education from B.F. Skinner's Science and Human Behavior.
Oh, yes. Skinner, always a good time.
I know Skinner can sometimes feel a little bit dense. So we're here to kind of unpack it a little bit and make it practical for you.
Yeah, make it useful.
Make it useful for you.
That's the goal.
Yes, and I think one of the most interesting things that Skinner points out right off the bat is that education, it's not just about knowing facts.
Right.
It's about building behaviors that will be useful in the future.
It's like it's not enough to just memorize the steps to baking a cake. You have to be able to actually bake the cake.
Right, exactly. So it's one thing to know the ingredients and the steps, but it's another thing to actually be able to put it all together.
Right, have that behavior.
And make that tasty cake.
Yeah.
Right. So
it's taking it beyond just the knowledge.
Yeah, it really is. It is. And it makes you wonder, who decides what those useful behaviors are?
Yeah.
Is it teachers? Is it parents? Is it the government?
Well, and this is where I think it gets interesting because control in education really comes from multiple sources, all with kind of their own agendas. You've got the family, the community, employers, government institutions, religious groups. They all play a role.
So it's like this big tug of war with everybody kind of pulling in different directions.
Exactly.
Sometimes those different sources of control, they can be at odds with each other.
Oh, absolutely. And think about, even a teenager who learns about evolution in school, but whose family holds different beliefs.
Yeah.
That creates this internal conflict.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so how do these controlling forces actually shape behavior? Are we talking about, grades and praise and diplomas or even, fear of punishment?
Right. All of that. Yeah. And in ABA, we call those reinforcers.
Okay.
They're consequences that either increase or decrease the likelihood of that behavior happening again.
So really like carrots and sticks, right? Like a good grade is a carrot and maybe failing a test is a stick.
Exactly.
But Skinner, he makes this point that these educational reinforcers, they often start out pretty artificial.
Yes.
Can you elaborate on that a little?
Yeah, they're not inherently rewarding or punishing.
Okay.
Think about it. A gold star doesn't have any real value on its own.
No.
But it becomes valuable because it's associated with, praise from a teacher or a sense of accomplishment.
Right. Or even just like being able to show it off to your friends and your parents.
Exactly.
Right.
Like, look what I got.
Exactly. But then the bigger question is, how do we make those artificial reinforcers translate to real world situations?
Right.
It's great to get a good grade on a French test.
Yeah.
But that's not the same thing as actually being able to speak French, in
No,
French.
it's not. And that's where I think the challenge lies, right? Skinner argued that these educational reinforcers should eventually be replaced by what he called natural consequences.
Okay.
So in other words, the real world benefits of using those skills you've learned.
So instead of just getting a good grade on the French test, the real reward is being able to, order that croissant in Paris and actually getting the croissant.
Right, and actually having a conversation, maybe using that language.
That's a reinforcement I can get behind.
Exactly.
I love croissants.
But here's where it gets, even more challenging.
Okay.
Because Skinner pointed out that these traditional educational reinforcers like grades and diplomas, they're becoming less effective over time.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is?
Well, I think the world is changing, right? And these old systems of control just aren't as powerful as they used to be.
Okay.
Think about it. The promise of a good job may not be as motivating to a student who's, growing up in this gig economy.
Right.
Or the social status that's associated with a college degree may not matter as much to someone who's focused on starting their own business.
Right. Yeah, the times are changing.
Yeah, they are.
So if traditional rewards are losing their punch, how do we as ABA professionals adapt?
Right.
What does this mean for the way we approach reinforcement?
And this is where I think Skinner's insights become really relevant to the work we do in ABA.
Okay.
We have to get creative, right? And find new ways to make learning meaningful and rewarding for the individuals we're working with.
So instead of just handing out stickers or tokens,
Right.
we have to kind of dig deeper and figure out what truly motivates each individual.
Exactly. We have to understand their unique values,
Right.
their interests, their goals, and then tailor our interventions accordingly.
I like that.
Yeah, and I think this leads into this idea of, knowledge as a repertoire of behaviors.
Okay.
Skinner argues that knowledge isn't just about possessing information. It's about being able to use that information in different situations, different contexts.
So it's not just knowing like that the capital of France is Paris.
Right.
It's about being able to use that to maybe plan a trip.
Exactly.
Or understand, French history, or even just to like follow along in a conversation.
Yeah, have a conversation
about French politics.
Yeah,
Right.
it's having that whole repertoire that goes with that piece of information.
It's not just that one fact.
Right.
It's all the things that go around.
That's exactly.
Yeah, I like that. And in ABA, we really focus on building those repertoires.
Yes.
Through a variety of techniques. You've probably heard of shaping, chaining, prompting. These are all ways of kind of breaking down these complex skills into smaller steps.
Yes.
And then reinforcing those steps along the way. And this reminds me of, like when we're teaching a kid how to tie their shoes.
Yeah.
You wouldn't just hand them the shoelace and be like, go for it.
Right.
You break it down.
You gotta break it down.
You model it.
You model it.
And then you give them lots of encouragement as they practice.
Yes, exactly. And I think that systematic approach is what really makes ABA so effective. Because we're not just hoping for the best. We're carefully building those skills step by step, making sure the individual has a solid foundation to build on.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
So this is all making a lot of sense. But what about when the individual we're working with, what if they push back against the learning process?
Yeah.
Skinner called that counter control, right?
He did.
So that would be like if a student is trying to, get out of doing their homework or they find a way to cheat on a test.
Right. That's a perfect example of counter control.
Yeah.
You see that in ABA too.
Okay.
It's basically any attempt to avoid or escape that control.
Okay.
Even if it's ultimately in the person's best interest to learn that skill or change the behavior.
Yeah, it could be really frustrating.
Yes.
You're trying to help someone and they seem to be resisting like every step of the way.
It can.
But you're saying it's a natural human response.
It is. Think about it. We all have that drive for autonomy, self-determination.
Right.
So when we feel like our choices are being restricted, even for a good reason, we might push back a little.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So how do we navigate that as ABA professionals?
Right.
How do we balance the need to influence behavior with respecting that individual's autonomy?
That's a great question, and I don't know that there's a simple answer.
Okay.
But one thing I think is important is to really focus on collaboration and consent.
Okay.
Making sure the individual understands why we're working on these skills, how these skills can benefit them.
So it's not about forcing compliance.
Right.
It's about building that partnership.
Yes.
Where the individual feels empowered.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that might mean that we have to adjust our approach. We might have to find reinforcers that are truly meaningful for that individual.
Okay.
And we might have to be willing to compromise.
Right. Yeah.
When it's necessary.
Yeah. This whole conversation about control and ABA, it's a lot more nuanced.
It is.
Than I think some people might realize.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's not just about getting someone to do what they want them to do.
No.
It's about understanding their motivations.
Right.
Respecting their autonomy.
Yeah.
Finding ways to work together.
Yes.
To achieve these positive outcomes.
And that brings us back to, what Skinner was saying about this changing landscape of control.
Right.
Those traditional methods just aren't as effective.
Right.
And we need to find these new and more collaborative ways to really engage people in that learning process.
So we need to be thinking outside the box, trying new strategies, and constantly evaluating, like, our interventions, are they really aligned with this individual's needs or goals?
Exactly. And that's what makes ABA so dynamic and exciting. It's constantly evolving.
Yeah.
And we have to be willing to, adapt and learn right alongside the individuals we're working with.
Yeah, this has been a really insightful discussion.
Yeah.
I feel like I have a much deeper understanding of how education and control kind of play out in the world of ABA.
Good. I'm glad.
And it's amazing how relevant Skinner's work still is today.
It really is.
Even though he was writing like decades ago, he really had such a deep understanding of human behavior and how we learn.
He did. He was ahead of his time in a lot of ways.
He was. And I think, one of the the biggest takeaways, for me at least, for ABA professionals, is that education.
Yeah.
At its core, it really is about empowering individuals.
Yes.
It's about, giving them the tools and the skills they need to succeed.
And figuring out what that success looks like for them.
Exactly. And that means, we're really moving away from that kind of old school top-down approach.
Right.
To control, we can't just impose our ideas of what someone should be learning.
Right.
Or how they should be behaving.
It has to be collaborative.
It really does. It has to be, respectful of where they're at.
Respectful, yeah. And mindful, I think, of the power dynamics, too.
Yes.
Because as ABA professionals, we are often working with individuals who are, more vulnerable.
Right.
So it's really important to approach this work with a lot of humility.
Yeah.
And a genuine desire to help.
Yeah, and this whole conversation has really got me thinking about the future of ABA. With all these changes that are happening in the world.
Right.
And the ways that those traditional control systems are kind of becoming less effective.
Yeah.
Where do you see the field going?
That's a great question. And I think the future of ABA is really bright.
Okay.
I think we're already seeing a shift towards these more personalized, person-centered approaches. And I think that's only going to continue.
So we're going to need to be even more creative.
Yes.
More innovative.
Yeah, embrace new technologies.
Use data in more sophisticated ways. And really just kind of constantly be refining our understanding of how this all works.
Exactly.
Of how reinforcement works.
And how we can collaborate more effectively, with families, educators, other professionals.
So it's really like a team effort.
It is. It takes a village.
It really does.
Yeah.
Well, this has been such an insightful discussion.
Good.
I really appreciate you taking the time to kind of break down these concepts for us.
My pleasure.
And for sharing your insights,
of course,
about education and control and how it all relates to ABA.
Absolutely.
I think our listeners are going to get a lot out of this.
I hope so.
So on that note, I think we're going to wrap up this episode of ABA Chapter Chat.
Sounds good.
A huge thank you to you.
Thank you
for joining us.
It's been fun.
And to all of our listeners out there.
Yes.
Keep learning, keep growing, and keep changing the world.
One behavior at a time.
One behavior at a time. We'll catch you next time for another deep dive into the fascinating world of ABA.